Hi, everybody. I see there are some people here. Wonderful. It's Deirdre. If you could send me a little chat to make sure that you can hear me, that would be great. Just want to make sure that we're all ready to go. Yeah, can you see where to leave a little chat just so I know? That'd be great. I'd hate for I'd hate to be speaking and have nobody hear me, So we're going to start in a minute or two, but I want to just be here with you. Yeah, as people keep coming on. Right. Right. Perfect. Okay. People can hear. That's good. Right. Anybody else want to say anything where you're from or how you're doing or? Right. Good. I don't think I can mess with whatever I've got going on here. So I've been practicing to make sure that it all works perfectly. So here's what I'm hoping. I'm just going to start since it's 4 o'clock and we have people here. So welcome. Welcome to the Heart Opens in Stages webinar. I'm Deirdre Fay, and today I'm going to be providing a map that I've only taught, I think, once in a training just earlier this month, actually. And these are people who are in an ongoing training with me. But they found it so useful, and when I've been talking to people, it seems so important and necessary that I wanted to spread out the word. And frankly, the number of people who have joined us, I think there were close to 400 people who registered for this webinar. So obviously there's something important that people are needing. So what I've done is I've integrated everything I know from trauma and attachment healing with the ancient wisdom traditions to give a healing path forward. So I know it's not a simple fix, and what I'm about to share with you isn't something that can be done quickly or easily, because every stage needs to be integrated into your life. And as it's integrated into your life, it's going to open up. It's going to arise in different ways. And as my friend and teacher Thomas Emilio said, we have to be willing to love it into being. So as hard as it is sometimes to put some of these things into practice, it's about loving what we want into being. And to do it in simple steps. And as you do that, you're going to find that your mind calms and your heart will naturally open safely. And this word safely is the key. And over again, people want to do things, but they're afraid to get hurt again, or be disappointed again, or betrayed again, right? We all have this fear. Yet there is a path through that isn't about repeating the same old patterns. That's something I've learned in my long studies of attachment theory and accessing the research of neuroscience. What a relief to know that the ancient wisdom traditions had their finger on the pulse of all this. And so it's all being integrated with all these many different modalities. Because as we begin to have to shift and change, what we find is that we have to crawl out of our shell, right? We all have these prickly parts of us. And how do we learn to trust that it's safe to peek out from this really painful, these prickly places inside of us? And to slowly dare to emerge a bit and open our soft belly and our tender hearts, right? This is really what we have to do, is do it slowly and carefully. And it means those of us with trauma and attachment wounding need to learn how to feel safe to reach, to trust, to hang out, to make connections after we've been hurt. And how do we do that? It's hard. We don't always know how to do it. And we don't always feel safe to do it. Yet there is a path through, and it's not about repeating the same old patterns. It's something that I've so clear on, and it's integrated with these wisdom traditions that say there is a path out of suffering. And every wisdom tradition of, of every kind says this, that there is a way out. So I know that I wanted to turn my own suffering into extending a hand to help others and help other people take the steps they need to have the life they want to live. That's really been important to me in my healing. But sometimes, as we all know, we want change, and yet it's really hard. So I thought, and hopefully wanting to break down the steps into smaller and smaller bits will help, because we will have a transformational cycle. That's a guarantee, right? There's no way we can't be in that. And so how do we use our transformational cycles in a way that really create new patterns, not the old patterns repeating, the old patterns of fear, disappointment, bitterness, hurt, where they drive us. We want to actually create something that's more powerful, more in tune with who we really are. Mine happened, many of you know, the kind of transformational crack I had happened while I was living in the safe cocoon of a yoga ashram in the 80s and 90s. And we really did a very rigorous practice at that point. And before that, I didn't know I had a trauma history. And yet somewhere in the period of time where I was there, something opened up. It literally cracked out of me. And I went from being able to be in my body and practice yoga and meditation and do all these things to suddenly not be able to do any of it at all. And it really kind of blew me away. It was quite scary. So when that happened to me, I thought I have to figure out how to put myself back together. That was in the early stages when trauma was just really being worked through, and I had to figure out how to do it and what to do. And so when my trauma history cracked me open like Humpty Dumpty, like with all of us, we have to figure out, how do we put ourselves back together again? And it was, how do we shift from, being broken apart by life to something that I call the modern day bodhisattva training, which is where we take our suffering as a way to crack our hearts open and actually live in a bigger heart. It's in this kind of perspective that suffering then turns into the heart of compassion. And that's what a bodhisattva is, somebody who transforms suffering into compassion. And every tradition has this phrase, bodhisattva might not be there, but every tradition has examples of people who shift their suffering into forgiveness or understanding and compassion. The underlying concept is the same for everyone. And from an attachment point of view, I've realized that there are a few things that we need. We need to learn how to be in the body and be grounded in this present moment. It's when we're in this moment that we can ground and connect to ourselves. Because one of the great problems is these wounds that we've had are imprinted in us on a really affective level. That means they don't go through our thinking capacity, our narrative capacity, that they're imprinted in a way that bypasses our ability to witness and observe what's going on. And if we didn't learn how to deal with difficult situations, and many of us who have these kind of early woundings don't have the secure inner foundation, well, then we get rattled, and we get easily rattled. And so we need to have anchors into ourself, into this larger sense of who we are. Because without that kind of solid foundation, our mind gets easily associated with all kinds of thoughts, feelings, and body sensations, which then turn into habits, right? They turn into old familiar habits that run us. And these are the idea from John Bowlby, who is a grandfather of attachment theory. He talks about the internal working model. And these old patterns literally become templates for how we live our life. So this is none of this is to talk about dismissing the old pattern, but rather to see how the impact these implicit, these really deeply embedded patterns have on us and how we feel stuck or can feel stuck. But let's take a moment now. And some of you know that I do a lot with becoming safely embodied, and we're going to actually take the time now and be inside. And one of the key elements I found about being in the body is to make contact with the spine. And when we have contact with the spine, it's easier for the heart to soften and relax. It's easier actually for our whole body to relax. So we're going to make that transition from outside, from being aware of what's going on outside, to actually drawing your energy in and being aware of your heart, your spine. Can you see that feel? Maybe you need to wiggle back, like letting your spine wiggle to the back of your chair. And maybe moving up and down, wiggling your body around. You might get a sense of that long tube that holds your entire nervous system back there. And it goes from the bottom of our skull all the way down to the bottom of our body. And breathing up and down. See if something happens to your breath. Maybe there's a change in your rhythm, something different in there. And in that long length, you are aware of the spine, then move your attention a little bit in front of you, not all the way to the edges of the skin in front of you, but just a little bit in front. Feeling the spine and that space in front of it, sort of mid-center in your chest. And that's really where the home of the heart is, and the many different layers of the heart. Sometimes it helps to put a hand on your chest and just feel the breath moving in and out through your heart, through your chest. Remembering all the while there's no way to do this right or wrong. We're just exploring being here and being here in this moment. And yesterday, when I was on a coaching call with some of the people in the Safely Embodied Learning community and in the Becoming Safely Embodied course, I asked them, can you be here inside your skin, inside your heart, and also outside at the same time? And that might take a little bit of practice, but just see if you can do that. Be aware of what's going on inside and be aware of what's going on outside at the same time. Remember, there's no need to be perfect here. No need to try to figure out anything. You're just doing it in your own way. And then just to bring yourself in a little bit more, maybe make a note in the live chat of what you experience. Can you experience being in your body, what that's like? So I can keep track of you along the way. I know that Anna said that she's joining a little bit late, so you just take your time and come in as you do, and no rush. No rush, because part of what we're learning is slowing down. When we transition into being in our body, it's a different pace, a different timing. When we, instead of paying attention to every little thing on the outside that's happening quickly, we slow it down and be with what's going on inside. So take a moment and drop me a note. Let me know how you're doing there. So I can keep track of you along the way. Good. I'll be checking in with that as we go through. So the transformational path that I talk about, that's really integrating all the attachment theory, trauma theory, and the ancient wisdom traditions, comes from this idea of really foundational from the work from John Bowlby, who had this idea of protesting. Now, he formed it in a different way, but how I've used it with people that they find really helpful is that we know in our heart, we know in our body, we know somewhere inside of us, right, that something's not working. And we can hear ourselves protesting against it and saying, no, this isn't, something's not right, something's not working. And so when we push against something, what do we tend to say to ourselves? We tend to say, it shouldn't be like this, right? We have some version of that, some version of criticizing, judging, blaming, of pushing away and saying, no, this isn't right. And when I really sat with that, I thought, who in us, how in us, what in us knows that it's not right? How do we stay in ourselves? You know, when we say this isn't right, how do we know it should be different? We know something should be different, right? So that led me to start exploring, well, what is that? What is that protest? And when I sat with it inside myself and with other people, I realized what was coming up was a need for something. And I began to look at the attachment needs that we all have that are really primary, fundamental, and necessary for our living, our growing, our developing. We have needs, and that's normal. But we've learned to shut ourselves down from that and make those needs wrong. So when the need comes up, the protest comes up, and then we are just trying to shut it down as quickly as we can. And yet, if we stay with those things, if we recognize the protest and start paying attention to what the need is that's coming up, we begin to see that there's some longing that we have. And that longing is actually trying to guide us in a different direction. So the protest is saying, no, this isn't right. And what we get hooked on is looking at that and say, oh, it's not right, it's not right. But instead, if we look and see, well, what could it be? Then we have some opportunity. We begin to open up what else might be there. And that's where I started talking about the nourishing opposite. So the protest is there. There's something else that wants to come in to nourish us. And yet we're so used to getting stuck in the protest that we don't even look and see what's nourishing out there. And part of the problem is that as we reach for what's nourishing, we're going to come up against some what I call turbulence. There's always going to be something, and each one of us is going to have our own version of what that something is. That's going to make it complicated. There's going to be criticism, anger, judgment, envy, depression, anxiety. Something's going to come up that's going to form our version of turbulence. Basically, as we move toward what we want, all this turbulence comes up and says, oh, you're crazy. Get back over there. Get back to what's comfortable and easy. And so we stay right in that. So part of what I want to do is help you listen to the guidance and then drink in the goodness of it all. And that's what we're going to be working through in the rest of the time today. As I've been talking about all this, people have asked me, okay, this all sounds so fine and good, but how do I open my heart? It's not that easy, you know, which really had me delve into and contemplate the mystical teachings I've studied over the past 40 years, especially drawing on the immersion I had with the hands of the Sufi masters that I worked with. And yesterday in the coaching call, one of the people in there said, but it's just a physical heart. There's nothing else going on there. And I thought, yes, that's what the masters that I trained with told me, is that there are these 4 different parts to our heart. There's the physical body, the heart, that lives in a fluid sac inside of our chest. That's really there. And that's true. And that, there's the mechanics of our being. That's, we are aware through our heart of all that goes on inside of us. And then inside of that, and the word inside can be a misnomer, but we have our physical heart, but then there's also a deeper version, perhaps, I don't know what the right word would be, more of our inner heart. And that this is where we have a greater sensitivity of what's going on. And often this is where we can get caught up in emotions. And then if we journey even deeper, again, the language is a little awkward here, but if we move inside of that, we have our soul. And our soul holds the deepest qualities, that what the Sufis talk about, the spiritual jewels, or our divine qualities that live there. And it's learning how to access that. And when we can, we move into a deeper sense of stillness and ease. And then there's an even deeper part of our heart, which is where there's a place of oneness and connection and no separation, where we are freed really from all the complications. So this is the basic structure, is that, so we're not going to be dealing with the physical heart and what happens on a physical plane, but more the spiritual or the soul mechanisms, the intuitive, the divine guidance that comes up. The language is so rough, isn't it? It's not always easy to say what exactly it is. So that's one piece of it. The other piece that I want to go through is the 7 stages of opening our heart. And that we're going to go through these. I'll just do the overview of it. Mindfulness. Well, and actually what I want to say is these are how I've adapted the ancient tradition to our more modern contemporary integration of attachment and trauma, so that we have a greater understanding of all this. So mindfulness is one, self-compassion, learning our common humanity, understanding remorse and renunciation, and the concept from yoga of pratyahara, and then surrender and trust, patience, acceptance, contentment, ease, and bliss. So we'll go through those one at a time. In mindfulness, the first step is really becoming aware of what's going on as it's happening without judgment. And I'm using this more from the frame of mindful self-compassion, where my colleague Chris Germer and Kristen Neff have created this wonderful training on mindful self-compassion. And the first step for them is becoming aware of the suffering that we're in. And then second, becoming self-aware and responsible for how we're actually participating or contributing to the suffering that we're in, or maybe how we're spreading that in some way. And none of us this is a hard phase where it's like, I don't want to see how I'm hurting myself or other people. But sometimes we are contributing by our ways of being, and it's often unintentional. Sometimes it's really just out of these old habits and ways of being. And along the way, the first thing we're going to encounter is our protest, right? These are the patterns of denial, blame, projection, where they out there or it out there is doing something to me. Or we feel as if it or they, oh gosh, if only they would be different, then my inner experience would be different, right? I'm sure I'm not alone in this, right? And of course, there's some truth to that. If our external world was different, then our internal world was different. And yet, the process of becoming an adult and being a full and complete human being is really learning our inner world exists and hanging on to anchoring ourselves in our inner world and living from that inner world to the outside world. How do we want to be with what goes on outside rather than letting outside just dictate how we are inside? So this path of personal development and a psycho-spiritual life is where we recognize that we're not really separate from it out there, that as we change inside, we can change the outside. We shift, we're connected through it all. That's really an important piece. But for now, rather than going into a long process, a long story about that, I want to just break it down to becoming mindful of the very simple fact that we're suffering, right? That's the very first step. Knowing our protest is there and that protest is creating some form of suffering. And when we have that, there's a way when we sit in that, we become aware that every one of us suffers. We can't not suffer, unfortunately. It's part of how we're all in it together. And as we recognize that we're suffering and that this is part of the human condition, there's a graciousness that grows, or a politeness, and we learn and feel from inside that we're all part of the same human family, and that really, just like me, right? Just like me, you know what it's like to suffer. And that just like me, every single one of us is going to suffer. It maybe have different versions, but we're all going to suffer in some form or another. And that it sounds so painful in some ways, but it's what it is joining in this common humanity, that we all know what it's like to be connected, and we all know what it's like to suffer. And that our suffering breaks us down in some way, and we no longer keep the suffering at bay and pretend it's not as bad as it is, or we shut down and do all the things that we do to numb it. And a really intimate door opens up inside of us, and we begin to sit in the reality that the pain of our defenses starts cracking open around our heart. And if we don't flinch, we meet ourselves in a really profound way, powerful way. The big question is, how are we going to meet ourselves? How are we going to be with ourselves when something happens, when something hard happens and difficult happens? So the next phase of the process is about remorse. Because when we do something, and there's so many times every day when we have moments of remorse, when we feel like, wow, I didn't do that as well as I wanted. I didn't say what I wanted to say in the right way. Or maybe we struggle with self-righteousness and we try to justify ourselves, and we try to just figure out what else we can do to say what we want to say. And our challenge is really to clear our mind and our heart and drop back into that place of common humanity, where we have done something, where we have hurt somebody, or we've hurt ourselves, or we've been in a hurtful situation. And rather than getting annoyed, that being in touch with the remorse actually puts us back on the path of recognizing goodness and gratitude and awakening to how we're constricting ourselves in this process. Because we all know what it's like to have done something, right? We know the struggle of wanting to be right, or blame somebody, or judge them, or to go one up, and I'm not as bad as they are. And none of us want to be wrong, right? And then what I hear from so many people, and from myself when I'm in that place, because none of us are above this. Why do I have to be the one? Why do I have to be the one to do all the work? Why is it always up to me? And inevitably, when we meet ourselves and we open the doors to our hearts, we're going to encounter the suffering behind our heart or behind somebody else's heart. We see and feel all the things that we've done to hurt others and how we've contributed to the pain of life. And yet this is a key passageway between living as if there's no internal world, or where the external world is our only reality. And we begin to build connections heart to heart, connected in compassion. And this place of remorse is really the early development of humility, this place of humility. And remember, humility is different than humiliation. Humility is being a real beginner's mind, we say in some traditions. It's the state of, well, there's no difference here. I can keep learning, I can grow, I've done things wrong, and I can grow and develop from that. In the attachment world, I started thinking of it as how important it is to be able to make mistakes. That mistakes come up not for shame and humiliation, but they really come up to guide us and to point us in the right direction. They arise as wisdom. But if we are been in environments where we've made mistakes and been shamed and humiliated for it, then we have all these defensive reactions around it. So as we sit with a sense of remorse, and if we can conjure up even a tiny bit of courage to face our inner world, and sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage. And we humbly accept our contribution to what has happened or how we've participated, even inadvertently, then this remorse actually becomes an alchemical agent, which helps us to abandon the behaviors that set up the painful external circumstances. And we develop a sense of firm resolve. We watch this cycle between our inner world and how it affects our outer world. And as we see that go on and on, we have a sense of resolve that develops, one in which it's easier to trust the process and the next step becomes possible and we can move through it. But the problem is that often our hearts shatter in the process and we build up a lot of defenses around it. But if we're growing ourselves from the inside, instead of demanding the outside world fix us and change it, if we're building our world from the inside and taking responsibility for the places where we're inadequate or we can't do it right, or and practice new skills, we grow up from the inside, or we build what we call a self-container. This is in the psychological world, and that self-container actually can hold us when life gets really wonky. And I know there was a period in my life when I lived at the ashram. There, I would go and I was training in triathlons all the time, and I went to this swimming pool at a monastery. That was the monastery. Then it was a Catholic monastery built around the Mother Mary. And so there was this wonderful chapel there. And I remember there was one time, and I cannot remember what instigated or why I was in pain and whatever the case was. And I remember going into this chapel late at night after I had gone swimming. And I just was sitting there and praying. And I had this incredible, profound realization that was like the mother came to me and said, my heart was cracking open because I thought my heart was only so big. And that yet, as my heart was cracking open, it was opening to an even larger heart. That was the whole point of it. And that really totally affected me and changed how I lived. It's like, okay, rather than going smaller and smaller, the whole process of life is to get bigger and bigger. So as we practice remorse, there's this idea, pratyahara, which is a yogic term of taking our energy and drawing it inside. So that rather than looking to the outside world for things, we have the courage to go inside and be with ourselves. And there the task is to ground in our own values, to ground in our heart, in the knowing we have about what's right or wrong or what we think is good or fair. And to empty ourselves of what's negative or what no longer serves us. And as we do this, we're going to wake up in a way and take account of what really matters. And then that really helps to guide us forward even more. And we start to, when we're tuned into ourselves, when we're connected to ourselves, we start to know the sincerity of our heart, of what in my Sufi tradition they call the jewel, your own uniqueness that's in there. And we can start to attune to that and live from that. And then life gets a lot easier, actually. But it means that we have to let go. And perhaps these really early steps, the earlier ones that I've talked about, are the platform that then brings us to this place where we can let go. And the more self-responsibility we take, it becomes easier and easier to not blame our external world or to live as if we're the whim of something, that happens. And instead, we're aware that we participate on a moment-to-moment basis with our daily life. And this is the idea of drawing our energy from the outside in. It's also what is there in attachment theory, that the child's developmental task is to form itself from the outside world. As the child gets mirrored, it forms itself. But yet, as an adult, our task is not to go out there to get mirrored on the outside to find a self on the inside, but to grow ourselves up and to have a sense of self inside so that we can then be in relationship with people on the outside. And pratyahara happens when we withdraw our senses and we actually find this magically complicated inner world. And instead of reacting to the outside as the cause of our distress or pain, we begin to untangle our inner world and free ourselves from the stories about our lives. So in this way, the outside world stimulates us or triggers pictures and felt experiences as a way to clean and clear the filters that keep us stuck, rather than as a way to grind us down and have us feel like life will never get any better. Oh, it's I can remember those days, so I can remember how hard that is to live in those states. But we're not quite done yet, and unfortunately, and the truth is we're never really done, but all those steps up to that point bring us to a place where we can let go of the hope that there's the place when we will be done, because the process of life is that we're unfolding all along the way. And this stage of the heart opening is a deep abiding and surrendering and learning to trust. And it's really when we let go of designing our life, being the one in charge. And instead, and this often happens with enormous trepidation and fear, we slowly open our fingers on the clutching reins of life, and we begin to let go a little bit, a little bit. So this idea of surrender and trust is really integral to all the ancient wisdom traditions of every kind. And certainly the Eastern traditions, and yoga is one of them, offer us insights into this life force energy, the prana or the chi, that's always inside, pushing us, trying to bring us home to ourselves, nudging us, guiding us, orienting us, trying to help us to remember who we are and go toward where we go without defenses or fears or disappointments. It's cleaning all that out of the way along the way. And the more we do that, the more we practice that, we begin to trust that prana will do the necessary cleaning and clearing of all the gunk in the way. And that we can surrender into the possibility that something greater than our willfulness and our smaller selves are operating. Yeah, I see there's some questions and I really want to get to them. But let me get through all this and then type all your questions down, and then we will get to them afterwards. So this is a place where we then arrive at patience, humility, and clarity. It's this is a really hard stage. It's where we think, oh God, I've waited so long for thousands of years and thousands of lifetimes, and when will things ever work, right? So we feel stripped down to our very basic, and that's that place of a deep, lovely sense of humility comes up, where we realize we can't control everything outside or inside us. It's a byproduct of knowing that we're suffering, or that suffering exists, that we might not be able to change it. But out of that comes a sense of clarity of who we really are. And it allows us to feel solid and trust ourselves with a deep sense of knowing. And in the process, then it's easier to hear what's going on inside, all the internal ruckus in our parts and how everybody's fighting for our attention. And we find it easier to welcome the things that happen or befriend what goes on while not getting caught up in it. So that when all the storms of life happen, which they do, right? We all know that we can drop into a sense of centeredness and connection inside of us. And in the yogic term, we have this word called sattvic, a sense of balance and clarity and goodness that really helps us move in the direction we want and makes it easier for us to pay attention to our prana, to the life force that's moving in and through us. But there's always a sense of, oh no, when is this going to happen? We're still caught up in that there's an outcome, that there's an end result. And things do get better, that's for sure. But we have this mentality of like we want to get fixed, right? And this is really where it gets washed out of us. And all there is to be in the uncomfortable dance of practice and patience. We've done the quote unquote work. And rather than hanging on that there's an outcome out there, we actually can sit in this moment and breathe and be with and love what's arising in us in this moment and let it take us to the next minute. We cycle in and through this process over and over again. And this in some ways allows the sandpaper of life to work. It's really dreadful magic, smoothing out our rough edges. Right? And when we let that happen, when we surrender to it instead of fighting against it, and we do it with patience, we have this really wonderful sense of opening that comes up. And I can speak to that as having happened many times to me throughout the process. I relate to it very well. And oddly enough, we find out there is an outcome, and it comes with a sense of humility. It's a crazy kind of contentment or acceptance that fills us with ease and makes the cycle of life not only easier to bear, but satisfying and nourishing in a surprising way. Our hearts come to rest. And instead of fighting against or protesting or pushing or trying to make life happen, we find ourselves more at ease and content. It becomes easier to practice a step-by-step transformational cycle without bitterness or resentment or frustration, which we all know so well, don't we? We get in those states. And where before it was a practice, now it becomes easier to see the best in ourselves and others, and that comes more easily with a sense of sureness. And the light in our heart provides easier guidance, and we have a sense of confidence, and we can interact with people and life, as if really I can see the divine in you as you see the divine in me. I can see the goodness. If that language doesn't work for you, then I can see the goodness in you, and you can see the goodness in me. And we're deeply or more deeply connected to the well of love and kindness and compassion that just is native to our real being. And I know that certainly in this state of common humanity, or trying to trust and practice this, we all need community and connection. Right now I'm in 3 or 4 groups of different forms of groups where I receive and can practice. And some of them, most of them actually, I pay for. There's some kind of coaching and guidance groups where I learn and trust. And some of them are ones where I'm with old colleagues from my ashram days where we are practicing these spiritual practices and seeing how it changes in our life, and then practicing how to share that with other people, which is part of what I'm doing here today. It's about practicing together, and so that we all need that sense of practice. I remember when, this is Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, when Chris Germer asked him to come to Boston and teach at the Harvard Conference for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He said, well, I only come and travel with my 50 monks and nuns. I don't travel by myself anymore. He said, I need that community to maintain my own sense of mindfulness, to live the values I want to live. And so it took a couple years, but Chris and Ron Siegel were able to find a way, and they brought all of Thich Nhat Hanh's, the 50 monks and nuns, with him, and brought this so he could travel in a way and teach from that place. And of course, it was really powerful. This was then one of the public offerings he did in the Boston Gardens. And this is what the ancient Buddhist, they're called tankas, the traveling altars, where there's one Buddha in the middle and surrounded by many other Buddhas. The same idea of traveling in a field of safety and goodness and mindfulness and connection. And we all need this, right? And certainly in the Christian tradition, Jesus had the 12 disciples that worked with him. But what I find in our modern world is so many of us don't have these kind of connections, and we don't have the sense of people supporting us and seeing the best in us and helping to guide us and point us in the right direction, right? So places where we can be together as we practice and do it wrong and do it and find out that doing it wrong doesn't have terrible consequences, which is part of the reason why I created this Safely Embodied Learning community, which some of you have heard me talk about. And if you want to know more, I'll send out well, here is the link for it. And you'll find out more about what I'm doing there. And the whole idea of that learning community it really is a learning community. It's not a therapeutic or a process in any way. It's like, how do I take the safely embodied skills and actually learn how to live inside my body, live inside the relationships I live in, live inside the relationship to myself. And as I grow my life into a better place, how do I change the world out there? Change myself on the inside and change the world on the outside. So there's pretty much that's how I want to go through. And I just want to check here. There's some questions. Maggie writes, I think this was a surrender point for me. Oh, yeah, Maggie, I wish I knew what that was. You said, I know this heart shattering. One day when I was fixing a broken pot, I thought about being strong in the broken places. That is so true. And yeah, you say earlier that it's resilience. That's true. It is the sense of resilience and the sense of that we are stronger in the broken places, that we can go through difficulty and bend in the wind rather than being broken apart by it, right? And frankly, this is part of the reason why I'm so strong about having places of connection and community and responding to people. Like, people say to me, oh my God, how can you do as much as you do and give so much? Because it's really important to me. I know what it was like for me to be on the healing journey and to be alone in it, and how hard that was. And I don't want that for you. I want that so that we can all move together faster and get to where we need to go and not be bound in this painful place. So that's about all I have to say, my dear friends. If you have questions, type them in, and we can recover and we can be okay. Maggie writes, that's absolutely true, right? So that we can recover and be okay. Now, I'd love to get some feedback from you. Was this what you were looking for? Is this what you were hoping for? Let me know. And I'm going to post this up, and you'll be able to look. I think because some of these things are just so automatic, it's going to be up for, I think, 3 days or so. So, yeah. I'm going to be doing, just to let you know, I'm going to be doing a shame, positively healing shame course. Probably not till March at this point, but just so you know, that's in there. And anyone who joins the Safely Embodied Learning community is going to get a discount on those courses, any future courses while you're in the group. So there's lots of benefits, and you can see them on the link, and I'll send that out actually as well. So I don't see any more comments or questions. Oh, here's one. Can you share a little bit more about the process of taking in goodness? I have found that to be a powerful breaking the heart open moment that unleashes layers of grief and memories. Right. It's a really powerful question you're asking, Kaylee. And it's when sadness breaks up, and when our heart is broken in whatever way it is, and there's the shattering, the grief that comes up, the memories come up, what happens is we end up getting stuck in them, don't we? We end up feeling like, get really identified with them rather than letting them wash through it. One of the most powerful things I learned as I was practicing with the Sufis is my teacher there would say, just let the goodness flow around the resistance like water around the boulders in a stream. And that really changed me. So I know that in the therapeutic model, what we do is when the resistance come up, we get caught in the resistance, and we sort of, what I talk about is excavate the grief, the remorse, the anger, the resentment, whatever it is, and we go into it deeply. And some of the other traditions, and this is certainly true in attachment theory and positive psychology, are all about moving and flowing around that. And that what my teachers would say to me is that the goodness, letting the goodness come in, actually starts washing away the grief. If we let it, takes it away, washing the rust off of our heart is what they would often say. So I hope that helps, Kaylee. There's practices in my last book, and certainly in the courses we do a lot about taking in the goodness, because that is, for most of us, certainly in the Western tradition, we don't have easy ways of accessing how do we take in. In my book, if you look at the practice of Soham is a really good practice for that. Maggie said, this has been great. Thank you for sharing your experience and love. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, dear. Thank you, Donna. Yeah. So, my dears, if there are no more questions or comments, I will put this up, and then really hope this has been of help to you and your process and in your healing. Haley says, thank you. I love the let the goodness flow around the resistance. I know that was a powerful turning point for me. Maggie said, I heard a really powerful saying, if my heart is broken, let it be broken open. I love that too. Thank you. Perfect. Haley, blessings. Thank you for your time. Well, thank you guys for being here and sharing, and how wonderful for me to know that you are out there doing the work you are on yourself and making this change you were to yourself so that your world around you changes. This is how real change happens, one by one, with each of us. So many, 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 many blessings to you. And I hope to see you at some point in some of the other courses or in the learning community or on a free thing that I do. Just love being in touch. All right, my dears, take care.